to the Greens, speaking of the debate, Adam Bant was at the press club today and made some really interesting comments about negative gearing. And Richard Marles, I'm going to play you that audio shortly too, just before, if you missed our interview. He was very firm on the deal with the Greens. So let's see what actually happens here if Labor do need to form a minority government. But Tom Elliott had Greens MP Max Chandler-Mather. He's the housing spokesman. He was on Tom's show this morning. Here's a little of what he had to say.
So our central priority on housing is scrapping negative gearing and the capital gains tax discount for property investors with multiple properties. Our proposal is that we would allow people to keep one if they have it, and going forward we would scrap it for everyone, because we think right now those combination of tax handouts are denying millions of renters the chance to buy their first home. We don't think it's fair that the government is giving sometimes property investors with 10 or 20 properties extra money to outbid a first home buyer. And the reality right now in Australia is it's easier to buy your 20th property sometimes than it is for a young family to buy their first. And the Greens think that needs to change because it's sort of breaking the social contract in this country. We now have people who can work hard their entire lives and they will die before they ever are able to buy a home, and that needs to change.
Okay, so clearly the Greens are coming for negative gearing and your housing. You know, if you're an investor, if you're a landlord, if you're trying to get into the first home market, what are the Greens going to do to housing in this country? And obviously, if they do hold the balance of power, they're going to want something from the Albanese government. Here's the Prime Minister.
There'll be no deals with the Greens by me after the election, and I'm aiming for majority government. We hold 78 seats. I'm aiming to hold every one of them.
The polls would suggest that we are heading for a minority government. And look, I had Cosmaris pollster on yesterday. He said, you never really know, but the indication is, and his best guesstimate, and looking at all of the research that he does, he is saying that the Greens are going to hold the balance of power. So what will this mean for our economy? Leith Van Oltelen is a chief economist and co-founder of Macro Business. He's also a former economist with the Victorian and Australian Treasuries. Leith, great to have you on.
Yeah, g'day, Jackie. Thanks for having me on again.
Okay, so Richard Marles and Albo have ruled out doing a deal, but we know Labor has done a deal with the Greens in the past. What would a minority government being formed with the Greens holding the balance of power mean?
Yeah, look, I actually think it'd be a pretty bad outcome. So you'd obviously have, a lot of nuttery around energy, and you'd have a lot of nuttery around, a lot of areas, to be quite frank. The Greens want to basically hose taxpayer money into everything. They want to basically subsidise everything, and it's just really unaffordable. Unfortunately, we have a budget deficit, and the deficit's projected to grow, and the Greens would basically throw money around like confetti.
I want to talk on a couple of things here. Negative gearing, rental caps, and the capital gains tax discount. In reality, what would that mean for the housing market?
Yeah, look, there are a lot of problems with this. So I agree with the Greens that Australia's property tax concessions are, a little bit too generous, and it certainly puts upward pressure on house prices. It doesn't really impact the rental market, but it does put upward pressure on house prices. But there are some serious problems with this policy. So, for starters, the Greens have proposed a rent freeze for 2 years, followed by rents only being able to increase at 2% every year. Now, I personally think it's incredibly unfair to freeze rents. Landlords should be able to pass on their costs. There's no freeze on mortgage payments. There's no freeze on council rates. There's no freeze on land taxes, energy costs, maintenance costs, or anything else that factors into owning investment properties or, in fact, any other thing. So why should there be a freeze on rents? I also think that it's likely to have unintended consequences. So, for example, if you're a landlord and you're unable to, negatively gear your property, and you're also unable to raise your rents, property investors are more likely to leave their homes vacant because it's just going to be, not worth renting them out. So that's more likely to decrease the number of homes that are available to rent. At the same time, property investors are likely to cut back on maintenance and improvements because they can't pass those costs on. And that'll result in poorer quality housing. And finally, property investors are more likely to kick tenants out more frequently so that they can then raise their rents. Because if rents are frozen, presumably under the policy, if you kick a tenant out, keep your property vacant for a bit and then bring another tenant in, you'll be able to then increase rents.
Can,
So
can,
that'll lead to less stability and more turnover for renters, which I think is a bad thing.
can I ask a dumb question? I'm good at those. But so if you're going to say to people you can't put your rent up from a legislative point of view, is there any precedent for that? Because it feels like the government is interfering in your own finances as an individual in this country if that were to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Look. This is a market, and I don't understand how they do it. The Greens have said that they do it in coordination with National Cabinet, but I don't actually know how they do it. There's also some other problems with this, Jackie. So, for example, they've said that the 50% capital gains discount will go, and if you own shares, it'll effectively revert back to the pre-1999 status. So that meant that when you sold an asset, you only charged on the real gain in your asset value. So if your shares went up 50% and inflation was 20%, you're going to get charged on the 30%. However, for housing, they're not going to. They're going to charge you on the nominal gain.
Unrealised gains, yeah.
No, not unrealised. It's they'll charge you when you sell it, but they won't adjust it for inflation. So if you own shares that go up 50% and inflation is 20%, you're going to get charged on 30%.
Yep.
But if you own property, you'll get charged on the full 50%.
Oh.
And that makes absolutely zero sense. Why would you treat one asset class differently to the other? And only real gains should be taxed, not nominal gains, which include inflation.
Are you concerned that Labor will have to give the Greens something? What do you think they'll give them? Because, I mean, the PM and Richard Marles there, he was pretty good, Richard Marles, just then. Like, he was saying he doesn't want it. He absolutely is ruling out any deal with the Greens. But the Greens are going to come cap in hand.
Yeah, absolutely they will. But there is also the likelihood that there'll be some other parties that would, hold the balance of power as well, maybe the Teals or some independents. So there is a chance that they can basically, side with them rather than the Greens. But really, we just don't know, Jackie. I mean, this is all uncertain. We don't know what the election result is, and we don't know how desperate they'll be. We'll just have to wait and see.
Indeed. Leith Van Onselen is the Chief Economist and co-founder of Macro Business. Leith, thank you. So 133693, upon hearing that, how concerned are you about our economy going